Hi, I'm Karuna. I'm the founder and executive director for Mind Oasis, and with me today is my friend and colleague, Brad Clement. Brad, how are you?
Doing well, doing well.
Before we dig into all of the amazing things, you're sort of like a multi-dimensional person. I just want to ask you about your morning. What did your morning look like today?
My morning, I picked some lettuce from our garden. I
Awesome.
made a black tea with fresh lemon and looked online for dinner reservations for my wife and I this evening.
Very cool, very cool. So you mentioned Tanya. Tell us a little bit about your household.
Two humans and a lot of furry animals running around. Two
Awesome.
dogs and a cat.
Very cool, very cool. And where in the world do you base out of?
Boulder, Colorado.
There you go. So, Brad, you and I met through some nonprofit work that we've both been involved in, and I'd love to just dive right into Pangje Foundation and for you to
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about the foundation and about your background. I can introduce you as a badass mountaineer. That's cool, but I'd rather hear from you sort of your perspective about your work in the Himalayas.
So my work in the Himalayas with Pangje Foundation evolved from my background in mountaineering. And I ended up spending a lot of time as a professional mountaineer and guide, working and filmmaker, working in Nepal. And for many, many years, over a decade, Everest was a big part of my life. And through that, I got to know the other pieces and regions of Nepal. Fast forward to 7 years ago, I ended up spending time filming a guy, Dr. Sam, and his work with local communities, local school kids, taking these kids out into the mountains, teaching them the importance of preserving their own backyard, the very fragile mountain environments of the Himalayas. He did this through the vehicle of snow leopard conservation, so endangered species protection, conservation, etc. So again, 7 years ago, I filmed this guy. That's a whole very long story about how we met and how we finally came to film together. But Sam and I just hit it off. He is a beautiful, beautiful human being. He's an incredible intellect. His mind is it's amazing. So we just hit it off, and from there we created Pangje Foundation to continue his work in helping kids and quite honestly communities understand, receive, realize higher education possibilities. So Pangje Foundation is as much about protecting snow leopards and very sensitive environments in the Himalaya as it is about helping communities and people through educational opportunities they would not otherwise receive or have access to.
Yeah. So when we were in Nepal last November, I recall that we were at a monastery, and the evening prior to our departure, they thought that a snow leopard had been around the monastery. Just talk a little bit about that experience, listening to what those folks had to say. It was interesting.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to back up a little bit. First, I love that you like. I seem to recall. Well, yes, as you do. But the day before we entered into that little village and that monastery, we were up in the village of Phu, and of course had the most unbelievable and super unique experience of a bunch of monks allowing us into a 1,500-year-old monastery that is not open to the public. And of course, that was, to me, that was the highlight of the trip. Was not expecting that. And they did that just because of their relationship to Pangje. And it was a surprise and so wonderful, so wonderful. So yeah, so then the next day we were at another monastery. and that was interesting to me. We met some guides, trekking guides. In fact, one of the few female trekking guides
Yeah.
I ever met in Nepal. So that was cool. And we all went to bed. Da, 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 da. And next thing we know, we're in the dining room for our breakfast, and they said, "Yeah, a tiger, a tiger tried to attack some of the horses and one of the dogs, and it was that dog that followed us for the entire duration of our trip." And I remember we all were looking at each other a bit confused. There are no tigers in that part of Nepal, that far into the mountains. And remember, we pulled out photos from Pangje's trail cameras and showed them a snow leopard. And they said, "That's it, that's the tiger." And I wish, I remember we all heard the horses running around. And,
oh yeah.
But we didn't know what was going on.
Right.
And so interesting that, and so important to the purpose we're trying to achieve with Pangje is, helping these important, meaningful communities in a very important part of the world. The Himalayas, Nepal's mountains and glaciers, snow and ice from the Himalayas hold fresh water for something like 20% of the world population.
Oh my goodness.
That's incredibly important. And so if you think that these wonderful people have just never had the opportunities to learn about their own backyard, they're calling these cats tigers. They're snow leopards, and there are fewer snow leopards in the world than there are tigers. And so just a reminder that it's important to serve and to help and to just somehow benefit this part of the world.
Yeah, so cool. I'm happy you went there. So the title of this podcast or video show is Meditation Happy Hour, Tea, Talk, and Truth with Karuna. And I was really excited to hear that you had your black tea this morning, so we got that out of the way. I'm a coffee girl, and I realized 2 minutes before we were meeting that my husband drank all the coffee. So I'm actually having in my Sit Happens cup sparkling water. So then we go from tea to talk, and then we'll eventually get to truth. So the whole point of Mind Oasis is we deliver online meditation practices, but it's not just to navel gaze, it's to be of service. And what you just talked about is really the whole point of Mind Oasis. When we reflect, when we're able to be quiet with ourselves, it opens up this possibility of opening up our heart to what this world needs. And so, because we're friends, I know that you don't necessarily have a formal sitting meditation, but one of the things that I thought our audience would be really interested in hearing about is the meditative quality of mountaineering. And if you could just talk a little bit about that. I'm sure you get, when you get interviewed, and I know you do, I'm sure you get a lot of questions about Everest. And if you want to go there, that's fine. But I'm more curious about the process of mountaineering and what that entails.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, for me, mountaineering has always just felt as though that's where I should be. It's hard to explain. And for many people, big mountains are not where they feel as though that's where they should be. But for me, that's always been the case. I always call it that's my church. Mm-hmm. I'm spiritual, but I don't really go towards any organized religion. But the mountains and that starkness, that harsh reality of life in an area that is not overly welcoming to life has always felt very comfortable to me. And I think in terms of meditation, like you said, I don't formally meditate, but it's very much in the moment. It's very much a cathartic experience to make big decisions in Mother Nature and have immediate consequences to those decisions. To me, that's always been a very beautiful thing, and something where I mentally, physically combine concentration. And so in a nutshell, that's it. I don't feel a need to talk about Everest. I think that was and is a beautiful mountain to me, but there are so many other places in the world that see at this point in time much less human traffic, and it's exploring and not knowing exactly where you're going, and making mistakes, and not knowing the path forward all the time, as opposed to kind of a mountain that you just know the roadmap. And so for me in these days, I like not always knowing where I'm going and trying to figure out the way up.
I think you just described my life. You probably just described a lot of people's lives right now. You know, the path of the known for many people is a place of comfort. It's not a place for growth necessarily. And for some of us who are adventurers, right, in different ways, you're not going to find me climbing 514 anytime. But I have different types of adventures. And I think there's a lot of people right now who are finding out that they've become adventurers because they've lost their job. They've maybe lost their health or the health of a loved one. They're deciding masks or no masks. So it's actually a really interesting time, I think, if you can get beyond fear, to be alive and to be exploring what does it mean to live your life big. And I would say that you do live your life big, right?
Well, let me try to explain something here, and I may fail miserably, but what we're experiencing now in this time of COVID and virus is a lot of uncertainty. Mm-hmm. But in mountaineering, what is interesting is over, at least for me, the career of mountaineering for 20 some odd years, uncertainty becomes the norm. Not knowing what's ahead becomes just what's going to happen. And so uncertainty becomes less scary. And once you don't have fear, once you understand what's happening to the best of your abilities, and it's never totally, nothing is fully understood anywhere. But once you understand that uncertainty is now the certain, it's really, there's freedom in that, and there's opportunity in that. And that's just one of the facets I love about exploring, whether it's trekking or climbing or big mountains, or just jumping into an area that you don't know anything about. Mm-hmm. You get confidence, you get freedom from knowing that uncertainty is an absolute, and it's just going to happen. And not, lowering the fear of the unknown is it's cool.
It's also really potent. And interestingly, what you just described is very much what happens in a formal meditation practice. People come to meditation thinking that they're going to get calm. And I always say on Mind Oasis, good luck. It's more of an ability to sit with your mind and to understand that your mind takes you on these crazy trips, and that there's this opportunity to experience freedom by understanding how life really works. And how life really works is it's very uncertain. So before we move into the partnership between Mind Oasis and Pangje, mm-hmm. I just want to touch on one other thing around mountaineering maybe. One of the things that as a Tibetan Buddhist I do is I contemplate death. And in fact, this morning in my meditation practice, I realized how frequently I contemplate death. And it's not to bum anyone out. I talk about it a lot in my private classes. But it's because when one realizes the uncertainty of life, then you have this opportunity to live really your life in this time to the fullest. And so I just am curious about, as a mountaineer, do you contemplate death, or is that sort of like the antithesis of what you've got going on? Or maybe something else altogether?
That's a good question. I think climbing in general, and then mountaineering big mountains, you realize death happens because, again, let me answer it this way. A few years ago, Tanya, my wife, and I were looking through an ice climbing guidebook. And this was just a guidebook for southern Colorado, nothing special. I think we counted 12 people, maybe more, in the photos featured in this guidebook that we either knew directly or knew of from just being in this community of climbers that were no longer alive. They'd all died climbing. So yes, as a climber, you realize death is a reality. But that's, it's not like every time we go into the mountains, we're thinking, oh my God, that this could be it. Quite the opposite. We go there because it's so life affirming, and it's so gorgeous in the way that mountaineering and the focus, that in the moment type of focus to make a move, to evaluate the environment around you, you learn so much about yourself as well. And so, yeah, we know death is out there, but death is a certainty for us all. Hopefully, we live beautiful lives and long lives before that happens. But yeah, climbing, you realize it's going to happen, but I don't think that's a constant thought. It's more about life and living.
Mm-hmm. I hope that our listeners are connecting these beautiful teachings that I often impart with exactly what you're saying. It's very interesting, the parallels. So I do want to talk about our trek and our meditation trekking to Nepal, but
Yeah.
I'm afraid if we go there before I ask one more question that we won't, that I'll forget to come back. So you did mention that there are other places other than Everest, and I'm not asking specifics, but are there other places in the world that that you love to go other than Nepal, or other than the Himalayas? I guess I should say it that way.
Yeah, there are, and you know this, but I'll tell it. East Africa has always been a favorite of mine, primarily because of the human connections I've made, the friends I've made mountaineering in that part of the world. And so we're talking Tanzania, Kenya, the Congo, incredible people living in really hard conditions that are still so kind and so wonderful. That's always been a special place for me. Quite honestly, I also love right here, home in the USA, Pacific Northwest, here in Colorado, beautiful places. Sometimes it's just in your own backyard.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember this winter we had a discussion about how, like, Mother Nature, I don't know, I explored a lot this winter how Mother Nature, regardless if it's a sunny day or if it's the harshest day from hell and you're getting blown over by the wind, how she delivers. And she delivers kind of this unrelenting ask to be present. And I think you can find that anywhere. And my experience, in Uganda is very similar, that the people of that country, of that region, to me, really make up kind of the multi-faceted beauty of that region. I think that we see a lot of poverty on news streams. And what I found in East Africa is that there's just this unbelievable richness of big life, of life happening. Yeah. So next May, the plan is that Mind Oasis and Pangje will take a trek into Nepal together, and you bring the trekking experience and all of the wonderful Nepal connections, and I bring some meditation and sort of the retreat aspect, and some Dharma, which is just teachings. And last year we went for our first time, and this will be our second time. So do you want to talk about sort of the trek itself?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, so this is going to be a great trek to an area of the country I've never been to before. So it's super, super exciting for me because I've always wanted to go to far west Nepal. Not only from a Pangje Foundation perspective is far western Nepal probably home to the highest population density of snow leopards, offering us tremendous potential in the future for integrating and working with communities in what we do. It's also an area of the country where really no outsiders, no tourists travel to. We're talking right against the Chinese border. We are so far west, it's crazy, but it's also super, super exciting. So we identified a valley where it's possible to camp and trek, and there are trails just like everywhere else in Nepal, but there's still no roads. There are no easy ways around. So it takes a couple flights, in-country flights, which are always exciting in Nepal,
Very exciting.
to get to where we're going. And then, I think we're going to be in a beautiful, almost untouched region of a country that has, of course, captured my heart for the last 20 years. We will spend a few nights in hotels, a few nights in tea houses, and then we go straight into just tent camping, hiking every day. We're going to have a wonderful crew of porters, cooks, local guides, and as you know, Karuna, these are guys that I've worked with for many, many, many years, and I know their whole families. We spent time in their homes, and I mean, they're just such quality guys. And for me, that's as exciting as anything, is to see these guys again, to just spend time with such heartfelt, wonderful people, traveling through a really, really special place in Nepal where not too many tourists go. So I don't know if that answered your questions.
Yeah. One of the things I want to just sort of focus on is your personal relationships with the folks who we meet and then hang out with. When Tristan and I went to Tanzania and we climbed Mount Kilimanjaro, we did so with a tourist company, and it was a great company, and we loved our guides. And in fact, I paid for one of our guides' education, and we've stayed in contact with one another. So that's lovely. But something that felt so different was to arrive in Kathmandu in that crazy traffic and smog and everything else, and all of the beeping and all of the chaos, and to have this beautiful smiling face waiting to greet us. And and Dayula was just awesome, and Gokul was awesome, and they became like my friends. I don't feel like I have to know them through you. I feel like I became friends with them, right?
Yep. Yeah.
Which is really different. Yeah, what else is unique about the way that we do this trip? I feel like there's more.
Well, what I try to do with every trip, and what I think we succeeded in tremendously with our first trek last November, was we do unique things, even in areas that do see tourists, in areas that do see crowds, and et cetera, because it's almost been 20 years now of going to Nepal and having these, I mean, these guys are our family now. Dayula has spent time in my home here in Colorado. He's only been to the US once, and he came here, and I've stood on top of Everest with him, and I know all of his nieces and nephews and uncles and brothers. We have a really fun relationship, and that allows us to craft really unique opportunities within our treks and within our climbs. So like the monastery in Phu, having them open those doors to us that never happens to tourists, for lack of a better word, tourists. That's something that was surprising even to me, as I mentioned, but something that kind of starts to happen after 20 years of working in this country and building relationships, not just with Dayula, but thankfully with Dayula and other people. And so those people and those human connections allow us to create some really special opportunities, and we hope to replicate what happened on our Pangje Mind Oasis trek in November last year to this upcoming May's trip and expedition in feeling out the group, who's on our team, what's important to them, and then we customize it as we go, but with a mindful thought of let's make this really special, whether that's visiting a monastery, whether that's visiting Dayula's home and having his uncle give us his very special prayer session.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever it is, we have the agility and ability to create really special moments that fit the needs and wants and aspiration and dreams of the particular people on our trip.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree with that. One of the things that really struck me, and Leanna, who joined us last year, she said it in a recent testimonial about the trip, and we all laughed so hard and so frequently. And I think that's one thing also about going in a group. We spend a little bit of time ahead of time at a guest hotel in Kathmandu, just picking up the last little schnitzies that you need and just getting acclimated to a post. I don't even know how many hour flight, but it's, it's pretty long. And in that experience, we all got to kind of start to know one another, and the group was intimate enough that, we still remain friends on WhatsApp, and, I'm going to see Geraldine in July. And so it isn't like I don't feel like with like other big groups where you end up on a bus and a plane. I mean, we might end up in a plane and we might end up in a bus, but it's sort of like together as a group. It's very intimate.
It's very intimate, and it's always very the way we do these trips, it's not just a cattle car.
Right.
Every aspect has been fine-tuned over years of learning what works and what doesn't work, and it's all very safe. It's all very custom, and you're never going to end up in a taxi with some guy who you don't know where he's taking you. It's all very personalized, very, very special.
Right. Yes, I would say a trip of a lifetime, to be sure. So the last part of Tea Talk and Truth is the truth part.
Okay. What is my truth?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a constantly evolving reality. 20 years ago, my truth would have been to dedicate my life to Denali and Alaska and just absorbing myself in really harsh mountaineering worlds. That evolved into international travel and loving every bit of it to get to the mountains that I thought I would never really see, whether that's Africa, Europe, Asia, wherever it was. And then I met Everest, and I thought, okay, Everest is my new Denali. Everest is my new Alaska. I want to spend the rest of my life working, guiding, filming on Everest. But it evolves, and I think people evolve, and so truth changes. For me right now, there are changing facets of who I am, and I think I would like my truth to be helping the communities that have touched my heart, because we live in a pretty special, wonderful, luxurious place in the United States. And if we can give back, that's where I want to be.
Cool. Very cool. So I was thinking about what my truth is. And I don't know that mine has evolved as much. I feel like instead I'm going back to my truth.
Okay.
And the truth of the matter, the truth of the Karuna is that I'm very loyal. And I've realized that I have just my small amount of people. And despite the fact that I meet a lot of people, I teach to a lot of people, I'm very loyal to my people. And I think it's because they're people like you, they're people like my friends at Mind Oasis who care about the world that we live in. And I'm always looking for truth seekers. I'm always looking for truth seekers. And one of the things that I think happened in Nepal when we were at Phu, which was this stark village. I mean, it was remote.
Yeah.
It's up there. One of the things that happened in that monastery, just to describe this a little bit to anyone who's listening, and then we'll wrap up. You know, when you walked in, someone had cared for all of the offering bowls. The candles were lit, and you could tell it wasn't for us. This was something that the caretakers of the monastery did, probably every morning, and probably cleaned up every night. And on the walls were rows of books and rows of scrolls. And there was the Hinayana, which are the foundational teachings of Buddhism, which is like how to live a good life. And then there is the Mahayana, which is how to live a good life for others. And then there's what they call in Nepal Tantrayana or Vajrayana, which are the secret teachings. And it really felt like that was a full encompassing of my experience with the people of Nepal, right? How do we care for ourselves? How do we care for one another? And then so much kind of mysticism, magical things between, right? You're walking along, you're trekking, and all of a sudden there are these very auspiciously placed stones. And, you know, we may not know what they mean exactly, but you know that they've been there for a while and that they have meaning. It's very different from a Western experience.
To say they've been there a while is an understatement. They've been there like almost 2,000 years.
Right.
And that, I don't believe that to be an exaggeration.
No.
In that area with those stones, I think that's accurate. So it's fascinating to think of the history and what those stones have witnessed through time.
Yeah, and for those folks who are familiar at all with when the monks left Tibet, when His Holiness left Tibet, most of those monks left with their robes on their back. My teacher's teacher left with a toothbrush and a hand towel, literally because he was brushing his teeth as they were getting bombed. And that's what he had. He had that, and he had his mala. I don't have my mala. And that's how he came over the mountains. And maybe it wasn't the exact path we were on, but it was someone came down that exact path that we were on. And to walk in those footsteps of the monks from Tibet felt really potent as well.
Great. Well, I think this trip in May, and by the way, I should mention that Nepal is going to begin opening up international travel in August. We'll see how that goes. But, you know, we're looking good as far as just the logistics and the reality of our world today. I think May 2021 is absolutely going to happen. It's going to be safe. We'll know so much more by then, and everyone will kind of have their systems down. So personally, I'm not concerned. I'm watching and witnessing and analyzing to make sure this is a safe, excellent trip. But other than COVID and all that craziness, this trip is far west Nepal, where no one goes, and we're just going to have such a powerful experience. One that I'm again, almost 20 years of traveling in Nepal, and this is as excited as I've ever been. And it's because we're visiting
I know, I'm totally stoked too.
Very special place. So it's going to be fantastic.
Yeah, good. Okay, so the way that people find out about the trip is to go to mindoasis.org. But I just want to give a plug again for Pangje Foundation. So if people are interested in learning more about your work with conservation, with the snow leopards, what is the website that they go to?
Pangje.org, that is Pangje.
Yep.
I know that is a complicated word to spell. Pangje is slang, Nepali slang for snow leopard. And so that's why that name exists. So Pangje.org, and you can learn more and watch videos and read up on what we do.
Cool. And so one of the aspects that Mind Oasis kind of brought to the partnership is that, you know, as good Buddhists, we like to, and yogis, we like to do seva, which is just a fancy word for service. And, you know, we kind of, for the first trip, toyed around with the idea of some sort of service project. But the truth of the matter is that those communities know what they need. And so we ended up donating money to the village of Fu so they could do what they needed to do. And that's what we'll do again this year. So we ask people if they can to fundraise just a little bit to help with that sort of service project. But we really decided it was more empowering to let the communities themselves decide what it is that they needed to do or what their community needed. So that.
Yeah. And it's not mandatory. It's just a request. Some people last year donated. Some people pooled together groups through their networks of who they know and raised a little money. Some people didn't, and that was never, you know, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what you do. It's all great. And what I want is to provide a life-altering experience in a wonderful, exotic, sometimes crazy part of the world that hopefully really positively changes everyone's life.
Yeah, and what about for people, just before we wrap up here, how about people who would be a little nervous about the physical aspect of trekking in the Himalayas?
Good question. Good question. So, you know, it's trekking, it's physical. We are going to hike for maybe 5 hours a day. That could sound really outrageous, but understand that 5 hours is very slow pace with no real weight on
Especially if you're my husband.
No weight on your back because we have this amazing support staff that does all the heavy lifting. And we appreciate them very well at the end of the trip. But 5 hours a day, couple hours in the morning, and then it's like a 2-hour lunch, and then it's a couple more hours in the afternoon, and then it's a wonderful time for tea in the afternoon before you take a little nap, before you have dinner. But it's physical, and everyone who joins, we will talk through fitness training, what it's really going to look like, what you should do to prepare, both mentally and physically. But you know what? It's a wonderful, wonderful experience. And I think some of the concern and curiosity and unsureness, is that a word?
It is now.
Of trekking leads to the beauty of trekking. I mean, not always knowing and not always sure if you can do something, and then you do it. That's just one of the cool things about trekking is you did do it and you accomplished something pretty cool.